with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. At that time, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery. And placing her in the middle, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away, one by one, beginning with the older ones. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more." The Gospel of the Lord. My brother and I were small children, and my mother made some chocolate chip cookies in order to bring them to the new neighbors who had moved in recently across the road from us. And she placed them on the rack so that they could cool off after she took them out of the oven. And she had to go somewhere for a little while, and she said, "Don't eat the cookies. If you want to take your fingers into adulthood, don't eat the cookies." Well, my dad was out in the yard working out back, and my brother and I were alone in the house, and I thought, well, surely she doesn't mean that all these cookies will go to the neighbors. And so I started eating some of the cookies, a lot of the cookies. And my brother then also ate some of the cookies. My mother came back. She was not happy. She looked very sad. And she said, "Who ate the cookies?" And I pointed at my brother. And since I had eaten them first, I had time to wash my hands and my face. But the chocolate was still on my brother's face and on his hands. So he was clearly guilty, caught in the act. And was I sorry for what I did at the time? No. Because I thought, well, it serves my brother right, because so many times I got blamed for what he did. Do I regret it now? Yes, I regret it now, and not so much because I haven't forgiven myself for my childishness. I've forgiven myself, but I regret it now because I still do the same thing, but not with cookies. Not with cookies. When things are difficult for me, I blame others for my problems, for my mistakes, for my sinfulness, for my lack of growth, for my cowardice. I think it's true for all of us. It's so easy. Those who are giving us a hard time, what do? We criticize them and find every possible thing wrong with them and think about everything that they're doing wrong rather than looking at ourselves and how we can do something. Or we start talking about them behind their back rather than talking to them with love and directness about the issues that we think should be addressed. Isn't that the truth, huh? Or we gossip, or we post nasty things on the internet about people we don't like, politicians or others, anonymously sometimes. There's many ways that we throw stones at one another and at others that we don't like. We think the problem is someone else. The gospel today, they shamed this woman caught in the act of adultery. According to the law of Moses, both in the book of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, it says that both the man and the woman caught in the act of adultery would be stoned to death. Well, where was the man? Maybe this was all a setup to get this woman in there in order to trap Jesus. Or maybe all of them had been one time or another guilty of sexual sin, and they always blamed the women for tempting them. So often it's easier to accuse a weaker group. They blamed her, they shamed her, they put her in the middle, and were ready to throw stones at her. So often we throw stones. We find groups that we don't like. We stereotype groups. We say, oh, if only that group was eliminated. In my country, in the United States, we impose long prison sentences to all the criminals, even nonviolent ones. Of course, they have to have consequences for their actions, but long prison sentences or the death penalty have no purpose whatsoever except to blame others, rather than think about what the problems are in our society that cause people to commit crimes, like the worship of wealth, the worship of pleasure, hedonism that people don't have access to, buying things. Rather than look at the problems in our own society and the ways we contribute, we want to blame others. If only we could get rid of them all, put them in prison forever, then we would be fine. Or we blame the drug addicts for the problems in society, think only if we can get rid of them. We blame some religious group, different from ourselves, for the problems that they cause, and focus our anger and sometimes hatred on others. Countries go to war because they are demonizing the other side's leaders, the other side's thinking. They demonize them as being the devils to justify their own war, and this groupthink in terms of casting all the blame on others leads to war and genocide, discrimination, and blocking the borders. Because if we can only keep those migrants out, if we can only keep those refugees out from these other countries, we'll be fine. We're always looking to blame others for our own problems. Always willing to throw stones. We condemn others frequently for what we do ourselves, rather than it's sometimes what others are doing that most upsets us. If we really thought about what's going on, it's because we're guilty of the same thing. Those scribes and Pharisees might have been guilty of sexual sins themselves, adultery. Very frequently, we see politicians in the world who condemn others for their sexual orientation or their sexual sins, and then 6 months or a year later we find out that they're doing the same thing, those politicians, that they condemned others for. Or even preachers, that happens as well. In another way, those scribes and Pharisees, many of them probably members of the Sanhedrin, they were metaphorically, figuratively sleeping with the Romans. cooperating, collaborating with the enemy, with the occupying force in order to protect their own privileges. They were committing adultery against the nation, and they weren't looking at that. So, if we're honest with ourselves, we're not much different than I was when I was a child, when I pointed at my brother. When we point at someone else, we blame our own problems rather than working towards solutions ourselves and challenging ourselves to make the world better. We point at others and blame them. Whenever we point at others, there's three fingers pointing back at ourselves, right? This fifth Sunday of Lent, we always look in anticipation of the next Sunday. And the first, in year A, we have the raising of Lazarus, the theme of death and resurrection, and also upon that point, the Sanhedrin decided to kill Jesus. In year B, we have the gospel of if the grain of wheat does not fall and die, it will not give new life, it will not produce fruit. And this year we have the scapegoating of the woman who committed adultery, in anticipation of what comes next week when we scapegoat Jesus Christ. They think if we could only kill this troublemaker, then we will have peace with the Romans, we won't have any problems, the people won't be riled up. Rather than looking at how they can change themselves, they cast all their problems and blame on Jesus Christ, and he allowed himself to be the scapegoat so that we would never scapegoat anyone else again. He allowed himself to be blamed for all the problems and allowed himself to die so that we would stop blaming others. But when we keep on blaming others for our own problems, and rather than working on solutions and working on improving ourselves, we are crucifying Jesus once again. And so, my dear brothers and sisters, let us enter into this most holy time of the year with commitment to stop blaming others, stop our negativity towards others, and look at improving our own lives, to live the gospel of Jesus Christ, to stop scapegoating others with our negativity, with our groupthink, with our gossip, with all the stones we throw. And Jesus promises us redemption and forgiveness. He did not judge the woman, he gave her mercy, and he did not judge those who wanted to throw stones at her. He allowed them to go. He has mercy on all of us. He does not want to condemn us, he wants to help us. And for that, we have his presence here in the Eucharist. Crucified and risen Lord, we have his power. He defeated sin, he defeated blaming, he defeated scapegoating by his resurrection, and he is here for us to help us to change and to become better and stop doing what we're doing that crucified him.